Welcome to Godcast Episode 2, where we read the Bible and discuss its religious, cultural, and historical significance. I'm your host, Andrew, along with your co-host, Stephen, and in the last episode, we read Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, which covers the first day of creation. We also talked a bit about the creation of the universe from a scientific point of view, and ended our discussion with relativity, which we plan to pick up again today, as well as moving into day 2. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk about something. I tried to find out how many churches there are in the United States, which is not an easy question to answer. I knew I was going to have to get an estimate, but I couldn't find a really good estimate. But I did run across a website where a lot of Christian leaders, the website was just for Christian leaders, supposedly, were talking about the fact that 100,000 churches were closing in the United States, some ridiculous number like that. Probably is more than it actually is. And of course, they're blaming it on the fact that people are losing faith, and that's why they're not going to church. And this guy wrote a comment, and he said, I'm 62 years old, and I went to church last week, and I probably won't go back because it was boring. The sermon was, I'm paraphrasing this guy's comment, but he said the sermon was boring, dry, humorless. The music was old and outdated, and it just felt decrepit, and it wasn't fun, and it didn't really make him feel connected to God. And the first reply, which set the tone for all the other replies, was from a pastor who said, the problem isn't the church, the problem is you. How dare you be quote-unquote bored when you're worshiping the Lord, created the universe and Jesus and all this stuff. And basically just telling this guy that he's an ungrateful git, you know. And I just can't, I couldn't believe it. I was sympathizing with this guy. And he also said, you know, if I'm in my 60s and I find church too boring, maybe the problem is attrition, right? How are you going to get young people in? They're not going to come. I'm in my 60s and I find it too boring. A 20-year-old, they're not going to come, you know? I don't know what you think about that, because I know that you had an experience where you were, how shall we say, asked to leave the church.
Asked to leave the church. Well, the church that I used to go to, there were a few old songs we had to accommodate the older people there, because obviously there are old people who go to church who like the old songs, but don't like any of the new stuff, or the rocky pop type stuff. So yeah, no, there was a lot of boring old things, but that was just to try to appease, make something for everyone. Essentially, there'll be kind of upbeat, newer songs for the younger people, and slower hymn-like stuff for the older generation. But you got this. If you got a 62-year-old guy saying your songs are too old, maybe you're playing really old songs.
Yeah,
things they were singing back in the Roman and Greek area.
Well, maybe the stuff they were playing was for the 80 and 90-year-olds who were coming in.
Yeah, it definitely has a point. A lot of churches won't play upbeat stuff just because they used to play in the old stuff, and obviously the rock is from the devil. So yeah, basically, if you go to a church that says that rock or pop is all music from the devil, then you're not really going to get many young, youthful people going.
Yeah, they're not going to be playing Highway to Hell, that's for sure.
Depends. Depends who's there in the audience.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I just thought that was an interesting question about why church attendance is down, if it's down at all. The preachers will all tell you that it's because people are losing their faith, but, another argument is maybe it's just attrition. Young people these days are overwhelmingly in favor of things like gay marriage. If you go to the church and it's boring and the pastor's telling you that gay marriage is wrong, I mean, it's, even if you don't lose your faith, are you really going to want to go? So, who knows? I get maybe in 50 years we'll look back and have a clearer answer.
Yeah, there's a lot of influences that go to why people aren't going to church. Most of them are a lot of people are converting to other faith systems that do, kind of accommodate for a bit of a newer tone to the more recent rather than ancient, outdated and stupid beliefs. And obviously that pastor's response to the poor old gentleman's comment is, bit more of the attitude thing. So, if that's the attitude of most pastors, then there's no reason why people aren't going to church.
Well, it brings up another interesting question about how do you interpret the Bible, because for a lot of people, I think, especially if you're Catholic, you're not meant to interpret it yourself. This whole podcast is about us reading it and talking about it, but that's a newer idea in history. For so long, people were not literate, and there was no printing press, so they couldn't get their hands on it anyway. And it wasn't until the Protestant Reformation that the ordinary layman would not only could get a copy in his hands, but was actually told, yes, you can read it and decide for yourself what it has to say. So we're sitting here and we're doing that. Mm-hmm. Neither one of us claim to be ministers, pastors, rabbis, whatever. And we're sitting here in the comfort of our homes, and we have a whatever version of the Bible we like, and we'll say whatever we want about it, think whatever we want about it. Maybe that's another shift. Maybe things are becoming more Protestantized, if that's even a word. I don't know what word I'm looking for here. But maybe the whole idea of a church and going to church to get whatever out of it is just not as important to people anymore.
Well, you're saying that, but if we go back to the 16th century in about 1510, we have this this guy who should be more well known than he is called William Tyndale. Basically, he's basically the guy who did the first ever translation from the Greek New Testament into English, and he effectively gave us our English structure of our sentences. Before he came along and started doing his translation of the Greek New Testament, English isn't quite as structured, even though you may say it's not got much of a structure. It does have a structure, but before it had even less of a structure than it does now. And basically, he gave us our subject, verb, object structure due to his translation of the New Testament. One of the things in his translation is he never ever used the word church. And in his translation of the New Testament, you would not find the word church. Well, you would find it in Acts, but only in reference to a pagan temple, which he called a church. Most of the time,
that's very funny. That's quite funny.
Exactly. That's
the only time the word church showed up was when it was referring to another religion.
Yeah, exactly. That was a Greek temple was referred to as a church, but that's because he translated the Greek ecclesia as congregation. So for William Tyndale doing the first ever English translation, the church itself wasn't a building. It was a group of people, anywhere, everywhere. It was a congregation, a gathering, and it was assembly. It's not this institutionalized church thing. And when he released when he printed the English New Testament, it was burned. Immediately by the Catholic Church. They immediately started burning every single copy of it.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. Maybe they were just cold. We don't know why they burned it. I'm just saying. They could have just been really cold.
Yeah. How do you explain that when the people started burning at the same time?
You're going to get a lot more heat off of a person than one book.
But true, but you're going to have to use a lot of heat to set that person on fire than compared to
That's true.
Not really. I know the heating point of a human. I'll ever done so.
Yeah, maybe we should change the subject before we find out more about you than we... All right, and with that, I think maybe we'll go ahead and move on and actually read some of the Bible in this Bible reading podcast. Just for
don't be silly.
For variety, just a change of pace.
Well, thankfully...
Yeah, I'll let you do the reading because 2 reasons. 1, you have that sexy British voice, English voice. And 2, you can pronounce a lot of the words in this. And there's a lot of names and things that I don't want to try and pronounce in here.
Oh, fair. Oh,
it's not all bad, but...
We're not at the names yet.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long reading.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, thankfully for us, the second day is quite short, oddly enough. It's only 3 verses long, but, well, here we go. So this is King James Version, Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day."
Yeah, a shorter day. Not he didn't do as much. He was exhausted from day one, so he took it a little easier. And he said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the water." Okay, that's fine. Seems like he's making land. Divide the waters from the waters. That makes sense, right? You got a continent that's going to divide the water up. Well, it says a firmament, and actually, not that I think they would have known this when they wrote the Bible, but didn't the landmass used to be one continent?
It did used to be one continent, but that actually doesn't happen until day 3.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I'm putting the cart in front of the horse here.
Yeah, you need to go to verse 8 where it says, "And God called the firmament heaven."
Right. Well, okay, but heaven's not. Well, I know some people say heaven's on earth, but I mean, isn't the heaven supposed to be? I mean, there's no heaven. Like, heaven's not supposed to be in the universe, is it? I mean, it's...
Well, again, this is where I come back to translational differences that we talked about before. In verse 1, we talked about heaven not necessarily being heaven as in God's abode, God's throne. It can be basically the sky, the atmosphere, the universe itself. It doesn't have to be heaven. I think the main issue here is with the fact that it says firmament. We think of a firmament, as something solid, something in the way, essentially, and basically saying, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters," in basically separating the sea from the sky. Essentially, according to the King James Version, there's a firmament. But unfortunately, this is betraying the fact that the King James Version wasn't a new translation. It was a revision of all the other previous ones, and unfortunately, due to the fact that Hebrew wasn't quite as well known at this point in time as it is now. Basically, we know that the word translated here as firmament is actually the Hebrew rakia. It means an expanse, not a solid. It doesn't have to be a solid, just an expanse or a space, essentially. So most of the modern translations now do put in the right translation here of verse. I'll say that, and then look at the New Jerusalem Bible, which is a Roman Catholic version. It says, "Let there be a vault through the middle of the waters to divide the waters in two."
It seems completely contradictory to what I intuitively think of as firmament, but I guess if you're saying that heaven could mean sky and firmament means expanse, and it does make sense. It makes more sense.
Mm-hmm. So NIV has expanse. The American Standard Version, oddly enough, has firmament. The New American Standard Bible has expanse.
Actually, this kind of it's making, the more I think about it, the more this is making sense to me. If you replace the word firmament with expanse, and you replace heaven with sky, because if you just think about it being all water, then it's like, okay, and he's making some extra space, and then he's calling that space the sky. That makes sense, right? I mean, because... Yeah,
well, basically, you think of the waters above the waters. We're 3,500 year old language of the average man here.
Yeah.
It's not basically, it's just basically saying, right, he's separated waters from the water you see in the sky, basically clouds and basically the atmosphere, essentially. So the interesting thing is that it says, in the King James Version, it says, "And God called the firmament heaven." In the Hebrew, it's shamayim, and as we learned from the first episode, anything with "im" on the end is plural, so it should be heavens. So basically, and God called the expanse skies. But basically, if you're going to translate, you need to more or less translate it. If something's plural,
it should still be plural.
It should still be plural. It shouldn't be suddenly become singular. Unfortunately, this betrays the fact, I've said it like 9 times already, that the King James Version is a rehash. It's a revision of older translations, as the King James Version sells itself on its front cover. The Holy Bible containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the original tongues, and with the former translations diligently compared and revised.
And wasn't it also supposed to be like one Bible to unify all the people? Because you had like the English version, and then you had the Bishop's Bible, and then you had the Bible. And what was that one that the Protestants basically had?
Geneva.
The Geneva Bible. And
Geneva
I heard something really from PBS that I thought was interesting. That in the Geneva version, they didn't use the word king. They replaced it with tyrant. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but if it is, that's pretty funny. And I could see why the king might not be happy with that.
Well, yeah, no, it would be, yeah, no, he wouldn't be, I do actually have the Geneva Bible here. I don't actually have an actual Geneva Bible here. I have a...
digital
version of it. Yeah, a digital version.
So then it was like, okay, well, let's take all these versions and, make one standard version that everyone will be happy with, and then there won't be any more fighting. But then, obviously...
if only.
Yeah,
well, it does actually, after it finishes saying about, with the former translations that compared and provide, in His Majesty's special command, it says, appointed to be read in churches. So the King James Version, it wasn't for the layman. It was for the church. It's for the Church of England, still in its infancy. Problem is, with the Church of England, it's essentially the Roman Catholic Church, but localized. Essentially, if you ever watch the Archbishop of Canterbury, basically he's essentially the English version of the Pope, although the Queen is essentially the head of the Kingdom of England, as in the new Pope. But the Archbishop of Canterbury is basically a Pope. He's got all the stupid garb and everything, the stupid hat and the stupid face.
And the stupid face. Someone looked at his face when he was young and said, "You've got Archbishop of Canterbury written all over it."
Very much so.
Why does everyone keep telling me that?
Well, to be honest, I like him better than the other one because he looked like the devil.
I gotta be honest, this is gonna sound really stupid. Every time I hear Archbishop of Canterbury, I think of those chocolate eggs with the cream in the middle. Because it sounds like Cadbury to me.
Cadbury's cream eggs.
Yeah. Just the way the brain works, I guess. Or maybe just the way my brain works.
I'm not saying anything. Okay, yeah, I've got the Geneva Bible. I'm going to compare it side by side with the King James Version. So this is verses 6 to 8 in the Geneva Bible. Again, God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Then God made the firmament and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day.
That's almost identical.
That basically, verse 6, the Geneva has again, whereas the King James Version has
just says and.
Just says
and then in verse 7, it has separated instead of divided, which, why, that's such a small I mean, is there really a big difference between separated and divided?
No, there's basically, it says, the synonyms, it's just, as it says on the King, it says, with the former translations diligently compared and revised, basically, the King James Version is one of the earliest, basically before Microsoft Word had it, search and replace function. Basically, they searched for a few things and replaced them with other exactly the same meaning English words. The good thing about the Geneva Bible is when it comes to the Hebrew wa, it doesn't constantly translate it as and like the King James Version. The King James Version has kept it with and God said this and God said that and God did this. Whereas the Geneva goes with again, then, and. King James Version keeps going up with God said. The Geneva has God said again. Like they've done a bit of variation with it. Rather than keep constantly saying the exact same thing. But yeah, as we see, basically, verse 6, the first word is different in the Geneva compared to the King James. It's replaced again with and. Then rather than and, in verse 7, God made the firmaments. And again, they've got divided instead of separated. And then instead of and, they put so the evening and the morning were the second. So basically, bar 5 different words. The King James Version is exactly the same in these 3 verses as the Geneva Bible.
And none of those changed words change any of the meaning. It's not like they changed heaven or firmament. The important words that we have been talking about are the same. It's again instead of and. I mean, this is separated instead of divided. These are tiny differences. This is
very tiny difference. But the most ridiculous thing here is in verse 6 in the King James Version, there's a little footnote next to firmament. It says firmament, Hebrew expansion.
Oh, really? Mine doesn't have the footnotes.
So basically, what they're betraying here, the fact that, as I said before, Hebrew really wasn't quite well known at this time. Basically, if they hadn't murdered William Tyndale in 1535, whom was probably the most advanced Hebrew scholar of his generation, he must have been about 200 plus years ahead of everyone else in his time.
And they killed him.
And they murdered him.
That's how it goes, you know?
That's how it goes. If you go against the church and you don't recant, they murder you instead. They were going to murder him whether he recanted or not, but anyway. Basically, if he'd been allowed to live on, we probably would have had a much better English version before. Unfortunately, the fact that they have the firmament betrays the fact that they're looking at the Latin Vulgate here to help them. Because in the Latin Vulgate, it says firmamentum.
Yeah, so the Latin Vulgate was the Latin version that they used for a long time, right?
Yeah, from about 1390, 400 CE, when Jerome had finally finished doing it. It's a revised version. It's not a new translation. They've changed a few things here and there from the old versions, but nothing much new. We will get to a few more newer stuff when we get a bit further on, but at the start, they've just changed a few agains and thens to just constantly having and instead. It's not. In fact, basically, they made it worse. To put it bluntly, they just made it worse. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the Geneva version there.
You know what? The problem is not that they made it repetitive and boring. The problem is that you have the audacity to think that worshiping God is boring. The problem is you, not the King James version.
No, it's not the King James version. It's me, is it?
Exactly.
Enough, quite a lot of people probably agree with you there. Well, when it comes to days and controversy, day 2 isn't really all that controversial, is it?
Yeah, it's not much there. I mean, I'm amazed there was
But water being separated and divided, and there's like space is being put between the main water, and the atmospheric water, and basically it being called the skies or the heavens. Basically, it's just a Hebrew word for the universe, essentially.
Okay, well, if there's nothing left to say about day 2, I guess we can move on to day 3.
There's nothing much else left to say on day 2. However, I did notice something that I have never noticed. I must have been reading this for, 22 years since when I could read when I was 4. And I've just noticed, when we go through the rest of the days, that this is the only day that it does not say, and God saw that it was good.
Really? I have to take another look now.
This is the only day. I only noticed it today when I was reading this before the show started. And I was like, where's God saying and he saw that it was good?
So this is the only day he was ashamed of.
This is the only day where apparently nothing particularly good happened.
This is the one he swept under the rug,
This is just like basically water's been separated, and that's about it.
Someone came in and they said, "Excuse me, I'd like to see day 2," and he says, "You don't want day 2. Let me show you some other days. I have some excellent days over here. You don't want day 2."
This is the only day where it does not say, and God saw that it was good.
And he called. Now, assuming now obviously we've decided that heaven or heavens could be sky, but if you just read it the way it's written, and God called the firmament heaven, and then he doesn't say it's good. It's like the one thing that isn't good is heaven.
The one thing that isn't good is where you live.
He needs to go to Lowe's and clean that place up, Get some patio furniture or something.
Or John Lewis for those of us in the UK. Right? Okay. But yeah, no, there's a little bit of trivia for us.
That's interesting.
Out of all the 6 days, day 2 is the one that God did not see was good. Didn't say it was bad though.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's
not bad. It's just
it might be good. He just didn't say it.
Yeah, it's just one of those.
He was just thinking it,
Okay, yeah. Well, day 2, pretty straightforward. Again, and then it ends with the usual, and the evening and the morning.
We're the second day.
We're the second day. Unlike the end of the first day, where it's just called Yom Echad or Day 1. This actually comes with the second. It doesn't say day 2. It says second day.
But day one was also the day he kind of made the concept of a day anyway, so...
Yeah, well, basically before, obviously, he created something, time didn't begin. So there was no sequence yet.
Yeah.
And then there was a sequence, and so obviously...
Well, it does take us back to relativity because, space and time are connected. So
space and time are definitely connected. One can't exist without the other.
If he's just creating mass here, he's also affecting time for someone in that reference frame, because that's basically what the theories of relativity say, is that there is no absolute reference frame for light. That was what they were looking for in the late 1800s. They wanted to find the ether, which is like this reference frame, this absolute reference frame for light. The idea is that reference frame is not in line with ours because the Earth is moving. So they built this contraption to try and detect changes in the speed of light. They thought they should be able to find it, and they didn't. And no matter what they did, the speed of light was always the same. And so Einstein had that breakthrough that said, no, the speed of light is constant because all laws. Before that, you had what was known as Galilean reference frames, or Galilean relativity, which just said that motion is the same in all reference frames. And Einstein, he was like Emerald. He said, bam, he kicked it up a notch and said, no, it's all laws of physics are the same in all reference frames. That includes light, that includes time, it includes everything. And then you have to say, wait a minute, if all the laws are the same, that includes time. That means time is relative too, because if it's the same in all reference frames, then not all reference frames have the same velocity, not all reference frames have the same gravitational effects, then obviously time is going to be, it has to be different from one reference frame to the other. Otherwise, the same experiment would not be the same in all reference frames. And he's saying that that is the case. It is going to be the same. So...
Yeah. Basically, depending on where you are, basically, a higher gravity and higher velocity, the person within that higher gravity and higher velocity won't notice a difference.
Right, yeah.
An outside observer will.
Yeah,
because the time in that reference frame is not the same as the time in your reference frame. So
exactly. If your
observer sees how it is in his reference frame.
Yeah, exactly. If you're observing your own reference frame, you don't notice anything out of the ordinary. It's always going to seem the same to you. Even if your reference frame is changing, the fact that you're observing your own reference frame means that it's always going to feel the same.
Your watch wouldn't look like it was beating any faster or slower. It would look like it was still doing the 60 an hour. But from the other person who was watching it, you'd be going, so...
Slow.
Would you going fast or slow? You'd be going...
You're slow. You'd be going horribly slow.
You'd be going very slow.
Very slow. So from the reference frame of Earth, which is where you left from, you would appear to slow down.
And you looking at Earth would make Earth appear to speed up?
Actually, I think that's not right, because...
Oh, no, it still looks like it's slowing down.
It still looks like it's slowing down until you come back.
Until you come back. And then it starts speeding up.
Then it starts speeding up. It's very weird, but if you want to know more, this isn't a science podcast. Maybe I should do one of those. But, definitely check it out. There's a lot of people who don't know this stuff, and it's been known for over 100 years, and it's worth maybe not 100 years at this point. Yeah,
it truly is remarkable, the general theory of relativity, how gravity affects the speed of light, and therefore time. Essentially, it's all brilliant.
So even if you're don't like science for its own sake, maybe if you're a Christian and you just want to understand God's universe better, either way, it's definitely up there with the top things of all time, top ideas of all time.
And I say, if you are a Christian, then you really should get to know the general theory of relativity, because that will help you explain how 6 days can almost equal 14 billion years.
Yeah. And not all Christians think that the universe are young Earth creationists, but
quite a few are.
Quite a few are, especially in America. We
you do
seem to have a
have-
disproportionate share of the nutters over here.
It's because you just have too many people reading the King James Version, that's all it is.
Is that what it is?
That's the problem. Just tell them, right, read a different version. Go and read a different version. Get your stupid idea that the King James Version was breathed out of God's face.
Well, okay, actually, before we move on to day 2, and we should move on to day 2 at some point, I went to the back of my King James Version here, and there's a little, post writing in here that's supposed to give you, the history of the Bible and stuff, and it's not very good. It's poorly edited. The grammar's bad. I mean, I don't mean to say those things to put down whoever wrote it, but it really isn't very good. But it gets to this part, and I had to highlight it because it was just really struck me. The growth of the Bible from 2 collections of smaller books into one grand whole was very slow, but God so directed the minds of men that they finally did the work and did it well. And it's this idea, no rational person thinks that God literally wrote the Bible. So instead they say it was divinely inspired or whatever. And all I can think, and that's basically what this is saying at the end, God willed it and and I don't know if you've ever seen the television show Third Rock from the Sun.
I have seen Third Rock from the Sun, but it's a long time ago.
It's about these aliens who come to Earth and they're basically studying the human condition, right? That's basically what the show winds up being about. Mm-hmm. But one of the crew members is an idiot, and his only function in the crew is to be a vessel for their boss, the big giant head. And once in a while, when the big giant head wants to talk to him, he spazzes out like he's having a seizure. Then he goes into a trance, incoming message from the big giant head. And then the big giant head talks to them through Harry, the character. And then when it's over, he kind of goes back to being himself, and he has no idea what happened. And whenever I read something like that, like at the end of this, in the King James, I always picture, thousands of years ago, scribes were sitting there, and it's just incoming message from God, and this is how. I mean, is this how people think that the Bible was written? I don't.
Kind of, yeah, but obviously not with the epileptic seizure that goes with it.
Yeah.
We call them prophets rather than, although there were a few scribes. Obviously, from what we can tell, every single prophet was literate. When it comes down to it, a prophet could write.
Yeah.
But people do believe that the King James Version is a God-inspired translation. Yet they say it, even the translators themselves say it isn't. And as we've seen from the comparison between the King James Version and the Geneva Bible, there's bar a few conjunction words, it's exactly the same. So if the King James Version is inspired, then so is the Geneva.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, unless God only meant to divinely inspire the difference between separated and divided.
Yeah. I don't like separated. I don't like that English word. We'll use divided instead.
The rest of it's fine. I only have it. I looked it over, and I have a few quibbles. An angel brings him a copy of the Geneva Bible. He gets done with it. He just slams it down on his desk furiously. What do you mean, separated? I said divided.
So Latin is separated from Latin, divide from Greek or something?
That may be where the difference comes in.
Oh no, it's from Latin as well. Divide is also from...
Not a lot of excuses here. It must be just personal preferences coming in.
Changing one English Latin word for another. That's quite funny. Saying that, hang on, let me just see what the Vulgate says. That might explain a few things.
Well, let me ask you this while you're looking.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of people who think the King James Version is authoritative, and honestly, I'm not going to tell somebody, especially not me personally, because I don't know that much about it, to say which version you should take authoritatively, especially if you believe it. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found after the King James Version, so wouldn't you want that incorporated into the version you're using?
You would, wouldn't you? You definitely would.
Yeah.
The problem is, the Dead Sea Scrolls Hebrew is, well, let's just say it's different to the Hebrew that they used to translate the King James Version from. Or particularly didn't use to translate the King James Version. I've just found out why they've used divide instead of separate.
Okay.
The Latin Vulgate uses
Wait for it.
dividat.
Aha!
It divided aquas ab aquas.
The
And
mystery
they divided
is
the
solved.
water from the water. That's where they get divide from instead of separate. They've gone to the Latin Vulgate. They're not even looking at Hebrew.
So
They're looking at the Latin.
So how much of the King James Version is from the Vulgate?
From, I don't know, a lot from the looks of things. Where is it? And God called the firmament heaven. In Hebrew, that's singular. In the Vulgate, Kalim. It is, sorry, in the Hebrew, it's plural. In the Vulgate, it's singular.
On the one hand, it seems a little silly for us to spend so much time looking at the difference between separated and divided, but on the other hand, it brings up a bigger issue of, where did the words for the King James Version come from?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just have to be these words. There's going to be lots of places in here where this word or that word, and it may not be as silly and trivial as divided and separated later on. So
and the firmament, and firmament.
Firmament, yeah.
It's all quite annoying, to be honest. Because it's.
I got to be honest. When I was more ignorant of the Bible, I actually just assumed the way everyone talked that people had not. I didn't think there was one original copy, but I thought there was more original copies than there really are. I had no idea how much of a hodgepodge this thing is. We find a scroll here and a thing there, and this translation and that translation, 400 years after the fact, 900 years after the fact. It's like, I just assumed it was better records than that. And yet it doesn't seem to bother anybody. I mean, it to the point where they're saying that the King James Version, and probably other versions too, are divinely inspired. I mean, as an atheist, I don't get that, because if this was another book, I don't see how people would, if this was Moby Dick or something, I mean, I don't see how people are not going to say that well, in the middle of the book, the boring part where he talks about all the different whale species, he says divided instead of separated, and that was divinely inspired.
The main problem I have with the King James Version is it says it's translated out of the original tongues. They didn't speak Latin in Genesis 3,500 years ago. Latin wasn't even around. But we just found here in the space of 3 verses that.
Yeah. That's pretty funny. I mean, there was no Latin, but we translated it from the original Latin.
We translated from the original Latin. Oh dear.
Jesus was real big into Latin food, though, I heard.
Yes. As you said, it comes to a bigger issue of whom or what do you trust when it comes to Scripture? What translation is trustworthy? What translation actually is from the original? Or at least what we can determine, critically determine as, more or less what the original text was. We've seen here for the King James Version, it's not looked at the original Hebrew, it's gone to the Latin. It's looked at the Latin Vulgate, which was done almost 2,000 years after Hebrew was written.
I can see a little bit more. I'm not sympathetic to the Catholic Church. I mean, I don't mean to offend any Catholics who might be listening, but I mean, I don't mean to offend them personally, right? Because there are Catholics who are great people, but I have very little sympathy for the Catholic Church, and that's as nice as I can put it. But I have a little bit more understanding of why it's such an authoritative top-down system.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's because they sit there and think, how reliable is the Bible? But if you say, okay, the Bible's not overly reliable, but we have that plus how do you say the word? Divination? I can never pronounce the word.
Divination?
Yeah. This idea that you have a cultural heritage, things that are passed down orally.
Traditions.
Traditions, things that were inspired, people who were inspired. The Pope is, inspired. So you have like multiple sources to guide you, and that's why you need a priest to tell you, because he doesn't just have the Bible. He has all these other resources as well to get the complete picture, Not that I believe that, but I can see that being an argument in favor of a more authoritative church structure. That doesn't sound as ridiculous before I knew, a little more of the history of the Bible.
Well, it's funny that you talk about priests and apparently them knowing more than you would. There's in the 16th century, around about the time when William Tyndale was doing his English translation, there was a little can't remember his name, but a bishop went round in England, just to test the priests on what they knew. And I think more than 2/3 couldn't name one of the 10 Commandments.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Just the other day for fun, my wife and I decided we'd see how many of the 10 Commandments we could name, and I got 9. So, I got all of them. She got 9. Yeah,
she got 9.
The one she missed was honor thy father and mother. That's the one she missed.
That's ironic, her being a mother as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I won't bother telling my son this one.
Yeah.
the only important one that actually applies to me.
Exactly.
Oh well.
Wasn't planning on killing anyone, so yeah.
But yeah, no. Back in the early, basically everything was conducted in Latin. The service were in Latin. The priests learned Latin, were reading stuff in Latin. Well, obviously not reading stuff in Latin. But yeah, one of the main issues back in the early 16th century was that the priests didn't actually know anything. So if you went to a church with a priest that didn't really know anything, basically you weren't going to know anything either.
Yeah, that's
so going to him for help wasn't going to be any help.
If you can't learn more than your teacher if you're relying on the teacher only. Well, it's like any authority figure. If they tell you something, you're going to believe it, and if the thing they're telling you is wrong, then it's worse, actually, because not only is it wrong, but you got it from an authority figure, so it's extra confirmation in your mind that it's accurate, whereas if you learned it on your own, you might actually question yourself unless you're completely arrogant.
Yeah, no, what's that? What was that experiment done by someone? Basically, he just got someone in a lab coat. Right. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, and it was basically how far will people go? What ridiculous things and unethical things will they do just because a scientist or a doctor or someone in a lab coat tells them to do it? Yeah. I think the one you're talking about, I don't remember the name of it, but it was the one where they had people giving each other electric shocks, right? I think that's the one you're thinking of. And the thing about electricity is that the voltage can be very high, but it still won't hurt you if the actual energy is low. So the voltage is basically just how big the pipe is, not necessarily how much water is coming through it. And so they would have people... Now, I have to preface a little bit, when it comes to dealing with real electrical things, oftentimes they go together, because if you increase the voltage, there's more electricity ready to come through. But it's not necessarily the case that more voltage equals, more power. And so the guy kept, the guy in the lab coat kept saying, turn it up, and the other person was an actor who was pretending to be hurt. Like, they were told to pretend like they were being shocked. And you would think the empathy from the person who was being tested would kick in and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. Clearly I'm hurting this other person. But because the person in the white coat was saying, yes, do it, they kept doing it much farther than they felt comfortable with. There's another experiment that was similar to that, where they had people take on one of two roles. One was like a prison guard type role, and the other was a prisoner. And they didn't actually give them a lot of rules, if I recall. They didn't tell them how to behave, except that they were supposed to be in those roles. Mm-hmm. And they let it go on a long time, like a week or 2 weeks. And they found out that, and it was there was like a real cells and everything like that. Mm-hmm. They were really being, I'm sure if they'd said they wanted to stop, they would have let them out, but they were really being kept in prison cells and stuff. And they found out that people playing the guards started really treating the other people nasty when there's no reason for it. It's just somehow that environment brought out that negative behavior. It's an interesting experiment. I'm not the sociologist, my wife is. Yeah, it brings up another interesting thing when it comes to the Bible, which is how many people
if nothing else, if they don't go to church, if they don't read the Bible, the one thing they think of when they think of the Bible or they think of religion is morality.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you get your morality from? And the Bible is the source for morality for a lot of people, or so they think.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not sure if there's anything in the Bible about people in lab coats telling you to shock people. Well, because you're right, it goes back to this idea that it's written 3,500 years ago or whatever, in another language in another time, and there is nothing in here. I'm holding my Bible, by the way, so you can't see, but when I say in here, I mean the Bible. There's nothing in here about abortion. There's nothing in here about gay marriage. There's nothing in here about stem cells. There's nothing in here about shocking people. There was no electricity back then. So a lot of times the quote-unquote morality that's being preached is just people interpreting things. It's general sayings, general phrases about, treat your neighbor as yourself and all that, and being extrapolated to apply to a situation that couldn't have been imagined by the people who wrote the Bible.
Yeah, a cut and paste job. That's what they kind of do. So they cut out little words and verses that make it say what they want it to say, rather than actually reading, rather than delving down into the original language, looking at the context and seeing it all as its actual in its bigger picture. There's a funny thing about looking at verses and cutting and pasting. Basically, one verse says, and Judas, basically it's like saying, you open your Bible, look at the first verse, it says, and Judas hung himself. Close the Bible, open it again, and read the other verse that you see. You go and do the same. It's kind of like that. You think the Bible's like, right, I'm going to open it, look at the first verse to see, and see what it says. And then I'm going to close it and open it again and see what else it says. Because it might say, and Judas hung himself, you go and do the same. Right, okay, maybe not how it should work. It's not, basically, Scripture doesn't work like that. You've got to read it in its context. And then you must look at it in its social and historical context as well. You can't just look at it from a modern point of view, because, as you say, the things that they're talking about here in Scripture, basically, I don't think they could talk about internet porn, really.
Yeah.
You could talk about temple prostitutes, obviously.
But God, Jesus' preference for porn is not in here, I'm assuming. Amputees, really, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. Apparently the Greek Orthodox Church, they figured it out. They cracked the code. They read between the lines. It's right there in Matthew, folks. It's pretty clear.
Lepers and money changes.
Well, sometimes people will say things like this part, this book of the Bible, John clearly says that it's wrong, or this is wrong, or that's wrong. And it's like, where does it say that? What do you mean? What do you mean by clearly? Because I'm a little confused. You found something in there, and you're twisting it around.
Yeah. I always love it when people say the Bible says this. Well, I say, well, where? And they're like, just says it, doesn't it? Yeah, but where? You're going to have to narrow it down.
It's a lot of pages here. You're gonna have to.
It's in there. Well, I know it's. If it is in there, then you know where it is, don't you? Anyway, what were we on? Second day, right? And then day 2, like all the rest of the other days, we'll end with. And the evening and the morning were the second day. Again, as we learned in the first episode, evening and morning is 3,500 year old Hebrew average day man speak for saying a disorder and then order. There was a disorder of waters, and then God ordered it into, and that ends the second day.
That's day 2. All right, so thanks for joining us. This was episode 2. We just talked about day 2 and the creation. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you join us again next time. We'd like to thank SacJo22 for releasing her version of A Prayer under the Creative Commons 3.0 license, which allowed us to use it in our podcast. If you'd like to find more music by SacJo22, visit ccmixter.org/files/SacJo, SACKJO22/36192. And for more information about the Creative Commons 3.0 license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc/3.0. Thank you.